Politicians, especially in American politics, are both revered and loathed, depending upon with whom you speak. Whether local, state, or federally elected, politicians are known for their actions, how they vote, and the positions they take. Most politicians sway back and forth in their ideology, depending upon how the political winds are blowing, often appearing to be a member of the opposite political party in their demeanor and voting record. But few politicians have clearly demonstrated track records of absolute failure and fiscal mismanagement than the Democrats who run the state of California. From the governors down to the mayors, they have created an environment that has become untenable for those who can and have abandoned the state. Los Angeles is a prime example of a city that has died in a state and is on life support. Only the obituary has yet to be posted. Who is Mayor Karen Bass? What is her background? What have her policies been? How do people like her keep getting reelected? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Karen Bass was born on October 3, 1953, in Los Angeles, California. Her mother was Wilhelmina Duckett, a housewife, and her father was DeWitt Talmadge Bass, a postman. They lived in the Venice and Fairfax neighborhoods of Los Angeles. While in middle school, Bass began volunteering for Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign and graduated from Alexander Hamilton High School in 1971. Bass studied philosophy at San Diego State University from 1971 to 1973 and graduated from the physician assistant program at the USC Keck School of Medicine in 1982. But in the mid-1970s, she was an organizer for the Venceramos Brigade, a pro-Cuban revolution group that organized trips by Americans to Cuba. She visited Cuba 8 times in the 1970s. Bass was an avowed communist and active member in the Venceramos Brigade, a Marxist training program linked to Fidel Castro's regime aimed at radicalizing young Americans into communist ideology. It was not for cultural exchange, but for ideological indoctrination. The trips to Cuba were to ostensibly work in solidarity with the Cuban people, often harvesting sugarcane or participating in construction projects. In reality, it was a terrorist training program teaching young radicals like Bass in the dark arts of subterfuge. The ultimate objective was to protest what they called U.S. imperialism and support the Cuban Revolution. Bass's involvement with the Venceramos Brigade is significant. A Los Angeles police investigator testified before Congress about the group, stating that its members were trained in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and bomb-making. Bass was not just a participant, she was a leader, visiting Cuba multiple times and praising Castro, a dictator known for his oppressive regime. Even after Castro's death, Bass referred to it as a great loss to the Cuban people, a statement that raises questions about her alignment with such a controversial figure. These trips were not illegal, but they were monitored by the FBI and CIA during the Cold War because Cuba was a communist dictatorship and a geopolitical adversary. One of her constant companions was Susan Rosenberg, who was also closely connected to the Weather Underground founders Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. All were instrumental in coordinating the brigade's U.S.-Cuba activities. Dohrn even negotiated directly with the Cuban government to organize the trips for American radicals. Ayers was also one of Barack Obama's Chicago mentors during his youth radicalization. Whenever the Venceramos Brigade delegation arrived in Cuba, they were hosted by the Institute of Friendship and the People's, ICAP, an organization closely tied to the Cuban Communist government. ICAP, or ICAP, is led by Fernando Gonzalez Yort, a former member of the WASP network, a group of Cuban spies convicted in the United States for espionage. In an exclusive interview with ADN America, former Cuban intelligence officer Enrique Garcia Diaz confirmed that ICAP plays a dual role, officially promoting solidarity while covertly supporting Cuban intelligence operations. Garcia Diaz confirmed that assertions directly to ADN America, saying that once potential targets are recruited, Havana explores how to utilize those individuals' positions in American society. In essence, Bass, among others, is a communist plant within the U.S. government at both the federal and state levels. The Vencerramos Brigade's ties to domestic terror groups are well documented. Among its recruits was Susan Rosenberg, a member of the M19 or May 19th Communist Organization, an offshoot of the Weather Underground, who participated in the November 7, 1983 bombing of the U.S. Capitol. Rosenberg was the most high-profile person convicted, along with 6 others, in the Capitol bombing and pardoned by President Bill Clinton. Due to her close association with Karen Bass, many believe that Bass was also pardoned. This is untrue, as she was never indicted or convicted in that case. In addition to the Capitol bombing, the indictment charged the 7 with conspiring to detonate explosives at 3 Washington military facilities and a number of sites in New York, including an FBI office on Staten Island, the Israeli Aircraft Industries Building, the South African Consulate, and the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. The conspirators also were charged with surveying other bombing targets as part of their armed propaganda campaign, including the old Executive Office building adjacent to the White House, the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, and the Army Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. And Bass knew them all. The defendants included Elizabeth Ann Duke, who was still being sought as a fugitive, Laura Whitehorn, Linda Evans, Marilyn Buck, and the aforementioned Susan Rosenberg, Timothy Blanc, and Alan Berkman, all of whom were incarcerated for other crimes, according to a Justice Department spokesman. In the alleged conspiracy, which began in July 1982 and extended to May 23, 1985, the defendants and unnamed co-conspirators, and many believe that Karen Bass is one of those, operated under the organizational names Revolutionary Fighting Group, Armed Resistance Unit, and the Red Guerrilla Resistance. Bass later earned a Bachelor of Science with a major in Health Sciences from California State University, Dominguez Hills in 1990. Bass later received a Master of Social Work from the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work in 2015 while serving in the House of Representatives. Bass never disavowed her communist sympathies. In fact, by taking the oath of office in Congress or as a mayor, she has openly violated these oaths of office by her actions, such as supporting a sanctuary city for illegal immigrant criminals, endangering public safety in violation of federal immigration law. Bass being an elected official is astounding, but not unprecedented. Many people with open and provable communist sympathies have served in Congress, but the amazing thing is those same people would, by their own actions, be ineligible to serve in the U.S. military. And we all take the oath to protect the Constitution and protect the nation, which is impossible if you support any form of socialism. But Bass is just one in a long line of progressive Democrats who have used socialist methods to strengthen their grip on their cities and states, reducing the quality of life for residents and increasing the major problems they claim to be correcting, much to the detriment of their constituents. Bass made headlines when it came to light that she was out of the country during the first critical days of the Palisades fire, one of the worst disasters in Los Angeles history. Instead of addressing the crisis, Bass was attending the inauguration of the newly elected communist president of Ghana, Dramani Mahama, further underscoring her deep ties to global leftist movements. Critics are calling for a deeper investigation into Bass's radical past and her affiliations with groups tied to domestic terrorism, particularly as the city of Los Angeles grapples with her controversial leadership during these ongoing crises. One reason for this renewed interest is Chris Simmons, a former Defense Intelligence Agency operative who played a key role in exposing Cuban spies in the U.S. He told ADN America that any interaction between ICAP and U.S. officials or their families should raise concerns given the organization's history of intelligence gathering. But Bass was not just a member, she was a leader. She was described as a leader of the group in a 1975 communist publication, according to Politico, although her office tried damage control and denied she ever had that role. But the evidence proves otherwise. Simmons also stated, later they are projected once recruited against targets of interest. If, for family reasons or personal characteristics, they had the potential to penetrate government or political institutions, they are guided to moderate their radical public positions so they could and can better integrate themselves for the future, as was done with convicted Cuban spy Ana Belén Montes. In fact, according to a report published by Tablet magazine, Bass led the movement's Southern California operations. In fact, an October 1975 edition of the Communist Daily World newspaper described Bass as leader of the Venceramos Brigade in Southern California. Another PhD dissertation documented her as a brigadista and then organizer for the Venceramos Brigades, saying, Karen visited Cuba every 6 months. Bass herself has stated that her involvement was driven by a desire to build relations between the American and Cuban people, and she has expressed admiration for aspects of the Cuban dictatorship's social policies. But Bass is not alone. Several current and former U.S. lawmakers have also been linked to the Venceramos Brigade and Fidel Castro. According to Reason magazine, prominent Democrat figures include Gregory Meeks, Democrat, Congressman from New York; Barbara Lee, Democrat, former Congresswoman from Northern California; Bill Delahunt, Democrat, Massachusetts, former Congressman; Leon Panetta, Democrat, former Congressman from California, who later served as Secretary of Defense and Director of the CIA; Chris Dodd, Democrat, Connecticut, former Senator from that state; Tom Harkin, Democrat, from Iowa, former Senator; Antonio Villaraigosa, Democrat, former Mayor of Los Angeles, who also traveled to Cuba with the brigade, and many others. They all joined Susan Rosenberg, a former member of the domestic terror group May 19th Communist Organization. So it would appear that the communists are deeply embedded within American politics. Despite all of this, Bass was elected to the California State Assembly in 2004 and was the first African-American woman to serve as Speaker of any U.S. state legislature in 2008. She became a community organizer and also served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2011 to 2022, chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. Bass also supported the anarchy and riots of 2020, along with progressive Democrats like Jerry Nadler, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi, all who also supported Antifa and Black Lives Matter rampages. And see our video on those two subjects. As a speaker, Bass promoted numerous laws to improve the state's child welfare system. During her first year, she ushered through expansion of healthy families' insurance coverage to prevent children from going without health insurance and worked to eliminate bureaucratic impediments to the certification of small businesses. She also secured more than $2.3 million to help revitalize the historic Vision Theater in Los Angeles and more than $600 million for Los Angeles Unified School District, although it would not appear the money did much good given the scores coming out of those schools for students. Bass worked with the governor and initiated the California Commission on the 21st Century Economy to reform California's tax code. She also fought to repeal the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. But Bass's efforts may have been self-serving, as none of those projects bore fruit and the city was plunged ever deeper into debt and higher taxes, which happened throughout the state. Bass naturally supported the campaigns of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and her loyalty was repaid. She was selected as the frontrunner to be the vice presidential pick for Joseph Biden, and see our 4 videos on Biden. But Bass was criticized for a statement she made in 2016 on the death of Cuban leader Fidel Castro, which she called a great loss to the Cuban people. Bass said that she had been trying to express her condolences to the Cuban population, but added that it's certainly something that I would not say again. Bass must have forgotten about the hundreds of thousands of Cubans who fled that island nation to try to reach American shores to have freedom. But Bass's problems were not over. Her communist past was coming back to haunt her, and even the most progressive left-wing socialist Democrats, initially working under the radar, saw that having Bass on the ticket was a disaster waiting to manifest itself. Mainstream America, including many lucid Democrats, would never elect a known communist. When Biden finally chose Kamala Harris as his running mate, Bass tweeted, "Kamala Harris is a great choice for vice president. Her tenacious pursuit of justice and relentless advocacy for the people is what is needed right now." Spoiler alert, we will have a video on Kamala Harris. In November 2020, Biden then considered Bass for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Secretary of Health and Human Services, but her past once again came back to haunt Democrats. Her confirmation hearings and grilling about her past from Republicans would have been explosive for the Democrat platform. Ultimately, Biden nominated Ohio Representative Marcia Fudge and California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to those posts, respectively, to avoid the controversy. But Bass was elected mayor of Los Angeles in 2022, which proved disastrous for the city across the board. This was brought forward rapidly when a video resurfaced highlighting her Marxist roots, which is now gaining traction online. Documentary filmmaker Errol Weber recently exposed Bass's involvement with the Venceramos Brigade and her 15 trips to Cuba and her support of spreading communism through violent revolution on a global scale. Given all the information that is known about Bass, despite the best efforts of liberal media outlets and publications to deny, disavow, or even hide her past, the facts raise troubling questions about her radical political ideology and approach to governance. But when cornered, Bass has publicly said the trips to Cuba shaped her views on healthcare and international solidarity, not communist ideology. She and her handlers claim that she did not participate in Venceramos Brigade trips to Cuba in her youth. We know that is a lie. There are documented receipts. Bass later said in interviews that she regretted the wording of her comments and made it clear that she does not support authoritarian regimes, but facts are very stubborn things. However, it would seem that Bass and the Democrats, especially under the Biden administration, continued their graft. They secured federal grants, such as $21.8 million in 2024 and later another $22 million via FEMA, specifically from the DHS FEMA Shelter and Services Program, to support newly arrived migrant families with food, housing, medical care, and transport. And please see our videos on the wildfires, FEMA, and Alejandro Mayorkas. The main argument Democrats use is that those aren't taxpayer-funded cash handouts. They're funded by private charitable donations. What they fail to say is that in some cases that is true, but millions of tax dollars were diverted to NGOs under the table who then used that money for illegals as a cover. This was manifested by Mayor Bass's political initiative. In mid-July 2025, she signed an executive order prompting nonprofits like Chirla and philanthropic partners to distribute cash cards worth a couple of $100s to each family affected by ICE raids. Remember, it is a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state. Democrat supporters emphasized this is a legal, federally funded humanitarian response, part of LA's sanctuary city policies meant to protect vulnerable populations and ensure community cohesion. But a forensic audit of where taxpayer money went is problematic for Bass and Governor Gavin Newsom. In effect, California taxpayers are expected to support illegals who will not work or are afraid to go to work for fear of being arrested. That is interfering with a federal law enforcement operation that is upholding federal immigration law. Bass also updated sanctuary city protocols to train her staff on how to avoid aiding ICE. That is a felony with several million counts if you look at every illegal they protect. But where did the money really come from? A leaked memo dated January 6, 2024 reveals that Karen Bass demanded her fire department's cut an extra $49 million just 1 week before the wildfires broke out from their budgets. This cut was already on top of $17.6 million of cuts in her latest budget. Again, see our video on those California wildfires and FEMA. The extra cuts requested just days before the fires broke out and devastated swaths of Los Angeles would have shut down 16 fire stations and crippled the department's ability to respond to emergencies. This was in fact manifested during the devastating LA wildfires, and Bass, as well as Newsom, are still under fire for her poor handling of the crisis. Her leadership has drawn legitimate criticism, and a recall election is being generated against her. These funds being redirected from firefighting efforts to activist organizations supporting illegals have raised concerns about Bass's commitment to public safety and effective governance. Also, Bass and the City Council, with the blessing of Governor Gavin Newsom, decided to maintain their sanctuary city and state policy for illegals at the expense of their own American citizens, especially veterans. Bass had said that she supported more housing in Los Angeles, but that she opposed changing zoning regulations so that denser housing would be allowed in neighborhoods that mandate single-family housing. At that time, 3/4 of all residentially zoned land in Los Angeles was exclusively zoned for single-family housing. However, in true political style, despite her previous statements, Bass is now supportive of Newsom and the California state government rezoning those areas destroyed by the fire, where up to 12,000 people lost their expensive homes. Only about 100 permits to rebuild have been issued to date. The rest of those destroyed properties are being taken over by the state using taxpayer money to acquire those properties at pennies on the dollar to build low-income, multiple-purpose housing, such as Housing and Urban Development Section 8 projects, ostensibly to make room for the homeless and illegal alien population. However, if this project succeeds, it may also help homeless veterans, but we will have to see. The effort to recall Mayor Karen Bass is currently underway in Los Angeles, California. A notice of the intention to recall Bass was filed with the city clerk on March 18, 2025. The recall effort is organized by the Recall Karen Bass Committee following the Palisades fire in January 2025. Mayor Karen Bass, politician, communist sympathizer, community organizer, and radical Democrat, is just one of many left-wing leaders who have helped destroy not just California, but many other places in the nation. One must still ask, what kind of people continue to vote for these self-destructive policies and the politicians who implement them? Many point to the fact that California is essentially a one-party state where elections are always controversial. Perhaps the mass exodus of businesses and people with the means to flee California speaks volumes, and the remaining residents will come to their senses in the future. One can only hope. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.